Hey all, it's been a couple of months since I've done an episode on my story, and where I'd left it off, I'd actually left it off last episode at rock bottom, where I was on unaliving watch and was in the process of taking a knee, and probably not a good spot to stop. To be honest, you do need to hear the next bit because there is light at the end of the tunnel. But I thought I'd do another episode of the My Story. This one might take a while because um, building a scaffolding for yourself to come out of unaliving ideation, which is the process of taking a knee when you've hit genuine rock bottom, and then trying to do that in the midst of parenting and pretty intense divorce battle in is not that easy. So it might take a bit of time to kind of step through. So welcome to another episode. For those of you who are new here, this is Stan again, a lived experience platform for male victims of family violence. Yes, abuse is not limited to one gender, but on this channel, I tend to focus on the male experience because it's so often underlooked. Um, For those of you who are familiar with Stand Again, you would have noticed I've slowed down a little bit on video content. That doesn't mean at all that I've slowed down on Stand Again. There's a few things that I've been building in the background, which are getting pretty close to launch as well. One of them is a book called Coercive Control: Every Tactic Explained, which by the time this particular video comes out, hopefully will be very, very close to publication. That one took me uh, a long time to live through, which is a sad bit. The school of hard knocks, if you want to call it that, and about 3 years to write. So I'm pretty chuffed that it's now done. It's had its final proofing. It's gone through its final reviews, and I'm kind of happy with where it's sitting at the moment. Though it's pretty dry. It's written for a clinical audience, not a survivor audience. So we'll see how that one lands with the types of audience that I hope starts to bring some greater education into the space of coercive control. And the other thing that I've been building, I won't announce here, but there's a couple of other products that I'm building that I'll step through with my business mentor tomorrow. And hopefully, when they announce those, they will meet a need, I hope, that the Stand Again community has, especially for those who are in the midst of divorce proceedings. So, back to this episode. So, where were we? Last episode, I was at rock bottom. I had lost between 4 to 6 kilos in weight within a week. I was in a crazy logic spiral where I was trying to figure out if I was so good at manipulating that I had manipulated myself into putting myself into situations where I would become a victim of abuse, and therefore the real manipulator was not the abuser, but was actually me because I had unconsciously manipulated myself into making that person abusive towards me. So, very crazy logic spiral. There's also very few ways to make your way out of that logic spiral because you end up just spinning back and back and back and around. It's like, no, 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 they were abusive towards me. And then you go, no, maybe they were abusive towards me because I manipulated myself into making her abusive towards me by kind of positioning myself as a victim or something else, which made them abusive. So it's a bad logic spiral which has no roads out. So I needed to build a scaffold to kind of make my way out because I was at the time I was on unaliving watch with my psychologist. Bless his cotton socks. My mother very kindly moved into my house to kind of watch and to cook and to be a presence to at least, remind me what was worth protecting. And to crawl back out of that particular hole, there's no switch. There's no, nice, neat set of words that someone says. There's nothing that kind of helps just snap someone out of it in any way, shape, or form. So I had Scott, my psychologist, and at the time I went seeking a new psychologist, and I was like, I think I need additional therapy to help me through this logic spiral. And I think I need them to either confirm that I'm so good at manipulating that I manipulated myself into getting into abusive situations, or was I actually in an abusive situation? And I needed someone to kind of bring that clarity in. So I ended up um, seeing this lady. I won't mention her name, but I ended up seeing this lady who was a clinical psychologist who specialized in trauma. And her modal, so everybody has a modal, so therapists tend to have a modal, and her model was schema therapy. So me as a trauma coach, mine's talk therapy with somatic therapy. So somatic is physical body as well as talk therapy. Hers is schema, which is kind of these personality schemas that typically trace back to childhood. So I ended up seeing her multiple times and had been pretty explicit, I think, around what my challenge was and where I was at. And I think, and I provided her all my historical documents, and my Scott very kindly gave her all my clinical records, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for whatever reason, that wasn't as helpful to me as I wanted it to be. And part of it was the the desire to keep bringing a conversation back to childhood and my parents. And at the time, it kind of didn't make much sense to me because I was like, no, I need to talk about the abusive relationship I was in. I'm happy to talk about my mum and my dad, but I would much rather talk about the abusive relationship I was in and how that worked. And I can't remember how many times I visited this particular individual, but I visited them many, many, many times. And I don't think not until after I had told them I won't be continuing with them anymore, did they ever reveal what they thought, which I think was probably part of the issue I might have been having at the time. So typically, a psychologist will keep their cards pretty close to their chest around their own, perspectives of what you're saying, aka I believe you that you were in an abusive relationship, or I don't believe that you're in an abusive relationship and you're actually manipulating yourself. They'll tend to keep that pretty close to the chest because they want to hold for longitudinal review. So longitudinal being over time. But obviously, this lady had all my clinical records from Scott for many, many years, and it wasn't until after I said, "Hey, look, I think I'm going to tap out. I'm not sure this particular therapy is helping." That she went, "Hey, I just so you can tap out, but I actually do believe that you've been in a highly abusive situation." But by then, I think I'd kind of lost because I wasn't speaking. I think with someone who at least didn't reveal um, whether or not they understood what I was saying or not. So that I tried and failed, and I came out of that. Well, tried and took a small step, not failed. That's a harsh thing to say. Like she was helpful in some ways. So that was kind of a small step towards moving out of the rock bottom, but it was kind of more an inch than a step, more than anything else, because it just gave me a tiny little um, data point to kind of keep me moving forward. And where it kind of gets really challenging when you're trying to get yourself out of these particular modes is um, you don't necessarily want to, which is a funny thing for saying because you are under assault. Like, I was barely sleeping at this particular point in my life. I was ruminating constantly. My brain was on fire, ripping through everything that had ever happened, stuff that I had forgotten, stuff that I had been through, and to kind of get out of this spiral, I started to write. And that writing process, I had already had. It was like a diary of abuse that had kind of come through the relationship of, some of the things I started to note down that was happening. So during the relationship, I started to keep a diary. This happened and this happened, and she said this and this occurred, that kind of stuff. Um, and I also started kind of notarizing as much as I could along the way, like dates and times and photos and all that kind of stuff, which you end up having to do within an abusive relationship because you get really confused. So I had a lot of that, and I started writing it out. And as I was writing it out, it was feeling like a lot of um, she did this, she did that kind of language, which is true. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, the book that's due for release in a few more days, which is coercive control. And the foundation of the blueprint of family violence against men, like I have been through every single one of those tactics. There's not a single tactic in the blueprint of family violence against men that I have not been through in some pretty intense ways. Um, the one, if anyone ever goes over my videos, there's one particular tactic called going nuclear that used to be used a lot. So going nuclear is when she used to just explode into rage and just destroy everything around her. So I started writing all this stuff down, and as I was writing it down, I was really starting to struggle to find a path out of the unaliving ideation I was having. And writing all of this stuff down was partly me just trying to go, Um, did I manipulate this person into doing these things, or did this person do these things? And some of what I was writing was helping me kind of clarify that in a way where I was going, well, I can't see how I would have manipulated this person into demanding that we have a one-sided open marriage where she gets to sleep with men. But if I even look at another woman, she would consider it a betrayal. That kind of stuff. And you're like, don't see the logic on how I would have manipulated that person into that situation where they kind of did that with a perspective of that being a logical thing for them to do. So I was starting to kind of come up with a logic that was helping me start to work through the mess of the way my brain was structured at the time. But it wasn't quite there because it felt again like I was taking no accountability, and that was not sitting well with me at all. And I went searching through multiple different psychologist references and books to read and all this kind of stuff on how to support yourself, and I was finding very little that helped me unpack between something a abusive person would do from the way the person would behave to what it might have actually triggered within me. And the more I was reading, the more it all was just mushed in together. Like it was very, in my mind, it was very, very unclean. And because it was all mushed in together, I felt like I didn't know what I could work on. Like, what can I work on to start to clear up this spin that I was in? So imagine you're, showing my age, but imagine you're Maverick, and you got goose in your back seat and you're in that flat spin from the Top Gun movie. That's very much like what it felt. And the more I was just kind of reaching for an eject button to kind of work it through, the more I felt like, this would be the end. I'd end up Goose or I'd end up as Maverick. So that was a really bad analogy. My apologies. So then I started to build out a model, and the model is TTI, which, if you're familiar with Stand Again, you should be familiar with the TTI chain. And I laid it out in a very logical way, which was there's a thing that person does, like the tactic that they do. Then there's the trigger within me that it hits, and then there's a impact or a way I behave. So now I can start to separate out guilt and shame from something that they did, because now I can go, I feel guilt and shame. That's an impact. It's not a tactic. Yeah, it's not what they did. I feel guilt and shame, and my life is run by guilt and shame, and I'm spiraling here in guilt and shame. But that's not how I got to guilt and shame. How I got to guilt and shame was, something happened that hit something within me that produced guilt and shame. So that really simple chain, which is the TTI psychological chain of abuse, was a really nice way of just me kind of breaking out, because then I can go, well, okay, cool. Now, if I can see the if I can see the tactic, then I can understand what that person did to make me feel guilt and shame. But more importantly, if I can see the trigger that it hit, so what was it in me that was at fault here, then I can take accountability for that. I can go, hey, she did X and it hit a trigger in me, and that trigger in me was actually my immaturity or my poor behaviors or my childhood wounds or my cultural narratives that kind of sit alongside me. And if I can see that, then I have something I can work on here. And if I can see what it made me do, which is it made me, fawn or fight or flight, then I can now start to logically go, all right, I've got a chain here that I can start to see. And the more I can see these chains, the more I can start to untangle myself from them and get out of this deep, dark hole that I was in. I heard a phrase the other day that was very important, because you don't do this stuff alone. And I heard a phrase the other day where I think it was from The West Wing, where it was this little story that one of the West Wing characters was telling another West Wing character, again showing my age, where the story goes, there's this man and he fell into a deep dark hole, and he's down there and looking up, and he sees a doctor walk past, and he's like, "Doctor, doctor, help! I'm stuck in this deep dark hole. I can't get out." And the doctor writes him a prescription and throws it down to him and waves him goodbye. And the man down there is like holding this prescription, going, "What do I do with this?" And then he sees a priest walk by, and he's like, "Priest, priest, help me! I'm stuck in this deep dark hole. I don't know how to make my way out." And the priest writes a prayer and throws it down the hole and says, "There you go. Say that twice," and then toddles off. And the man's looking at this piece of paper going, "I still don't know my way out." And then a friend comes along and he says, "Hey, friend, I'm stuck down this deep, dark hole." And his friend jumps down the hole. And he's like, "What did you do that for?" "Now we're both down here." And the friend goes, "Yes, we are both down here. But I've been here before and I know the way out." So that's part of the premise for Stand Again, to be honest. That's the mission of Stand Again, which is I've been down this deep dark hole and I know the way out. But also in the moment that I'm talking about, back in this unaliving ideation, I was lucky because I had friends who were around me, which was Scott, my psychologist, and my one good friend, who could also very honestly say they'd also been down this deep dark hole before, and they also knew the way out. So when I worked with them on this TTI model that I'd kind of created, this tactic, trigger, and impact model, and I started to kind of play it out in terms of the stages of recovery, which is educate, survive, recover, and thrive. And again, this is pre the creation of Stand Again. This is me just trying to work it out. That helped us as a triad kind of build that right language to start to get out of the hole that I was in. And there's an element in here which is worth thinking through, which is, and I might have started this episode with this, but you don't just kind of pop up and go, yeah, cool, I'm all good, and then brush yourself off and go. You end up just taking a knee before you stand, and which is, I think, why this episode is called Taking a Knee, because you don't just suddenly stand again. You first take a knee. And when you take a knee, it's all about stabilizing. And it's the moment where the storm is going around you and you're there. If you can imagine, I love a good visual, but if you can imagine it's a dark night, there's a storm raging and you're outside, and you've got your hands planted on the ground, you're on one knee, your head's bowed. That's the moment on what it feels like when you're trying to get through this type of stuff. And in this instance, obviously, the storm was the crazy divorce process, which was occurring at the time, plus the logic spiral that I was in post, the damage that the court system had done to me. And I say that quite glibly, but I had been through the court process, and the reality is I had to find a second psychologist purely just to deal with what I had been through in the court process, not the abuse. That's not the abuse, but what I had been through in the court process. So taking that knee meant going. I while I'm sitting here and I'm drenched, wet, and it's pouring rain, and there's lightning coming and thunderstorm going on. Needed to think and needed to steady myself. And TCI and the stages within Stand Again, which is Educate, Survive, Recover, and Thrive, they help bring a level of clarity that I really desperately needed in that moment. They helped me um, make sure that I was doing the right thing at the right time. And this was a moment where I had to go back to survivor mode instead of recovery mode. And it helped me bring some clarity around the experience that I was having in such a way that you could start to recognize and let go of what had occurred, but also recognize what within you needed to be repaired and fixed and changed at the time as well. And that's part of the important of it. So I was deep in this kind of structure, and as I said, I was writing stuff down. So I started writing that book, which is the Coercive Control, Every Tactic Explained, or the Blueprint of Family Violence, however you want to play it out. I started writing down TTI purely as a perspective of help me figure out what I take accountability over, what versus what I don't take accountability over. And I started writing out the stages and how the stages would play out and what you do in what stages. So educate was purely around tactic. Okay, if I can see the tactic, then I can start to mentally separate myself from it. And if I survive is it's not about fixing triggers; it's actually about blunting their effect, which is grey rock. So grey rock, for example, doesn't fix shit. Mind my language. Grey rock doesn't fix anything. All grey rock does is blunt your triggers so that your impact, which is the way you respond, is in a safer mode. So you've moved from um, this, I'm screaming and yelling or I'm reacting in a certain way to going, I'm going to blunt my trigger that you're hitting by deploying grey rock. I'm going to be as uninteresting as possible. And I'm going to give you no jaded answers. So no justification, no argument, no defense, no excuse. I'm going to give you those types of answers in Grey Rock. Again, that's just changing the impact. Yeah, you haven't healed any trigger. You haven't identified the childhood wound that is being hit by that particular tactic. So you haven't fixed anything. All you've done is mask it. You've just masked it, which again is perfectly fine when you're in survival mode. And then when you're in recovery mode, that's when you go and you start to heal it. So I gave myself that permission where I was sitting there going, now is not the time in the middle of this storm of unaliving ideation, crazy, which I'll get onto in a second, crazy divorce process. And I'll tell you a little bit about what was happening in that in a moment. And now is not the time for me to kind of be, kneeling down in the mud, going, oh yeah, now's the time for me to start to, rebuild start to bake a cake and rebuild my house and all that kind of stuff. Nah, now's the time to just weather, just weather this shit. So it stopped you to kind of rush into, I should be perfectly fine now, which is another thing that you tend to fall into a trap of, especially when you've been through coercive control for a very long time, where the abuser used to rip you to shreds for not being 1,000% perfect 1,000% of the time. That narrative doesn't go away. And if you are in a recovery process, you also apply that narrative to your recovery. And you also tell yourself, hey, I should be 100% perfectly recovered post separation by now, and I'm not, even though I'm in the middle of the core process. It's also so people put that pressure on themselves because they haven't addressed that particular trigger. So I started to get this trauma informed pathway out, and with that kind of clarity, with the TCI and with the stages, and with the support I was getting from my family and from Scott and my friend, I was starting to steady myself, and a tiny little part from that clinical psychologist I saw, as well. And I was starting to steady myself. So I took a couple of deliberate actions here. So deliberate action one was, I was unemployed at the time, so that actually made things a lot easier because I didn't have that additional pressure from work happening. I stripped away, I'll call it every distraction, and it was partly self isolation, but partly shame, where I essentially just went, I'm isolating down to 4 people that I'm going to engage with: my mum, who had moved in, my one friend, my lawyer, and Scott. That was it. I just kind of went, they're the 4 people. I stopped trying to fix anything. So all that time I had been spending in recovery prior to the court process. So again, if you recall from prior episodes, I'd been in therapy for a while. I had already been through, in my mind anyway, a version of Educate and Survive, and I thought I was in recovery. And then the court process hit, and the court totally destroyed me. So I actually went back to, I'm not going to do any recovery work anymore. I'm just going to go back to survival work for now. And then I started focusing on small routines. So it's kind of like uh, small wins to provide yourself enough to kind of stay steady. So for me, that was running. So I'd go running to this place near here, which has got this beautiful lake. And if you get it at like 5 o'clock in the morning, it's just got this nice little fog that kind of comes up over the lake as you're running around it. And that just became my thing. So peace uh, was very far away, mentally. So internally, it was not there, but externally, it was. So I'd kind of tried to cut out as much as possible just to kind of give myself some time. And in the midst of all this, I was still parenting, yeah. So I still had the kids. And at that stage, we were 50-50, so we kind of, the kids were still bouncing around between the houses. And parenting when you have fallen apart, so I was a broken man. Parenting when you are a broken man um, is challenging because you end up holding it all together during the times that you have custody. You have moments that bleed through where you not necessarily disassociate, but you're lost to the moment. Like the kids will be doing something and you're just off a million miles away because you're worried about court coming up. You're worried about, everything that kind of happened through the court process to date, and you're ruminating, all that kind of stuff. Then you have insane levels of guilt that follow, where you just feel like you're not a good enough dad. I'm not a good enough dad. I'm not a good enough dad. Would kind of play around in your head. So you'd have to kind of play this kind of really conscious decision making of just being enough right now. Like I'm just going to be the most I can be right now, just to kind of get out through this period. And then you end up focusing on, as I said, kind of small wins, where you go, I'm just going to do these small wins for the kids, to kind of create an environment for them that I kind of are inching them towards, nicer things. So I'll, set out some, paintings for the girls, and I'll do this for the girls, and I'll do that for the girls, so on and so forth. You just keep doing that type of stuff. So then, that weirdly also gives you a steady anchor, because you remember, um, for me anyway, it became what am I trying to steady myself for? But you end up in a crazy level of self doubt as well, where you are worried that, as I said back at the beginning around the logic spiral, that you are so manipulative that you've manipulated yourself into thinking that you're not manipulative. So therefore, you might actually be manipulative. In which case, if you are, that manipulative, where you can manipulate yourself into not thinking you're manipulative, then it's highly likely you might be toxic to your children, because you're that good at manipulation. Like again, it's a silly logic spiral, but at the time that was your thought pattern, or that was my thought pattern at the time. So that was just kind of the way you'd think, and you'd distance yourself from the kids as well. So you'd go, um, I will either overcorrect and do things that I think are not manipulative, like allowing them to do whatever that they want whenever they want. Because if I say, hey, no, you can't have chocolate for breakfast, then maybe that means I'm manipulative. Or you disengage completely from the children and say what's safer for them is I don't talk to them. So this is, again, I said this in the last episode. Again, the duty of care for a family report writer, around the damage that they can do to parents is just not there. Actually, I'll talk about that for a second, because I think this is a really important point. So if anybody who's going through the family report writing process, um, the family report writer, their client is the court. It is not the parents, and it is not the children. That's a very, very important distinction, yeah? Their duty of care is to the court, and the court only. What that means is, when the family report writer writes their report, they write a report that is narratively sound for the judge to follow. So narratively sound for the judge to follow. Not factual, not kind of subjective, and not balanced, because it needs to hold to a narrative that the court can understand, or the judge in the court can follow and understand. So that means moments of ambiguity, moments of doubt, moments where contrary evidence are played out, have to be written in such a way that hold to a singular narrative, so as not to confuse the courts. Yeah? So very, very, very important distinction to understand when it comes to family report writers. What that might do to a parent can be extremely destructive, because innoxious things get played out in a particular way that hold up to the narrative. The narrative becomes king. And if the family report writer starts off with a narrative, because they're also under a time crunch. They typically have to do this in a couple of weeks. If they already started off with a hypothesis, and that hypothesis was mum good, dad bad, and they're writing the report, then they'll write that report in such a way that continues to hold to that narrative, mum good, dad bad, even if the evidence is contrary, like it was in my report. So in my report, for example, my ex-wife had full control over the finances and didn't allow him to make any purchases at all, which is evidence that he is financially controlling. And you go, that doesn't make logical sense. She had full control over the finances, refused to allow him to purchase anything, which is therefore evidence that he is financially controlling. Like, that doesn't make sense. But to hold to the narrative that was established, which is mum good, dad bad, that was the way it had to be written, because the audience is the judge. It is not the parents. It is not the kids. It's the judge. Yeah. So that's very, very important to understand when it comes to these family report writing and the way they tend to operate. There are obviously issues with that. I'm not going to get into it, but that's the challenge. So then I have lost track of where I was in my story. My apologies. So I was probably talking about leading into court. So the legal fight was insane. So my how do I put it? I had one report from CPS, which obviously come back as completely cleared and noted me as a victim of family violence. That was great. Even the CPS said, please be aware this ex-wife will not stop. I had my ex-wife's former lawyers who had shared with us that they personally think she's a fucking psycho, which is also a great little tick. But then, and I had my legal team who were 100% behind me all the way. So it's like, we got you. Don't worry about the cash. We'll sort all out later, which they did. They held to their word. They didn't bill me until after everything was sorted. So I was starting to feel like there was some sort of at least rational people in the system, yeah. And I'm going to talk about this for a second because I think it's important. I think people are very quick and easy to rip the family court system apart, and I've done it. Yeah, I've spoken in this episode alone about how the family court destroyed me, and that's the truth. But it's not the system that's at fault. Yeah, it's just people occasionally do things, and it's just people who are in the system. And sometimes you get good people, and sometimes you don't. And it's kind of hard to kind of work through how that might play out, because there are some assumptions that might play out in some people's minds that just help them make narrative sense over what's going on. Like I was saying before with the family report writer, people just want to make things nice and simple and easy so that they can navigate around it in as rapid and, in their view anyway, rapid and as efficient way as possible. It's just the way it happens. But the court system itself is just the court system. And people, I hope, genuinely try to do their best. And when I started going into chambers, that's genuinely what I felt I was encountering. So despite my really bad experience with one clinical psychologist, yeah, within the court system, the rest of the people I encountered were actually all quite rational and quite good. So I think it's um, probably a little bit too easy to just make a blanket statement. I don't think that actually holds up to the mustard, I think is the phrase. So we were going in. I won't give too many specifics, but the demands were pretty insane. There was, a value dollar amount that she wanted to be paid each month, which is the equivalent of most people's very high paying full time wage. irrespective of how much money I was earning at the time. So I was unemployed at the time, and it was like, still, I want you to pay this value amount per month. Plus, on top of that, she wanted me to go into a binding child support agreement where I paid child support on top of the value. Plus, on top of that, that I was to be responsible for, I had this memorized, any and all expenses related to the rearing of the children, irrespective of household. So, so all expenses related to the rearing of the children, including food and groceries and rent and utilities across both households. So it was child support plus that, which also would have been school fees and uniforms and any and all expenses related to the rearing of children, all 100% my responsibility. Plus, so plus, not included in, plus child support, plus in Australia it's called spousal maintenance. In the US, I think people call it alimony. Um, and then on that, and I've got this in my tips, kind of thing as well. But oh, hang on, what was it? um, any extracurricular activities the children were to undertake are 100% the responsibility of the father to take them, irrespective of who had custody. So if the kids had soccer, for example, and were in her custody, then I was to drop what I was doing and go pick them up and take them. It's like, sure, 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 sure. And then she wanted specific language, I think, put into the parenting arrangements, which just said, um, if the custody is at 50-50, then it needs to be language that says they live with mum and only visit dad. So again, I've got this in my tips folder on the website. You got to watch for language like that, because it's an implication of authority, so decision-making authority, because they live with mum and they only visit dad. And if you note when you go to um, uh, children's doctors and other types of settings, they'll tend to ask, who's what's a primary household, and if you've got a court order under a parenting arrangement with court seal that says they live with mum and they visit dad, even if it's 50-50 custody, then that starts to establish a precedent with doctors and schools and all that kind of stuff. So you got to be careful for that type of stuff. Um, and she wanted 80% of the asset pool and wanted all my shares and the gold and got my grandmother's inheritance and all these paintings and all that kind of stuff, all that kind of stuff. So logic was, in my mind, way out the window. And we're in chambers for an entire day with this blether of negotiators and lawyers and solicitors all running around between rooms and negotiating, and as they kind of go. It was pretty, for anybody who's been through it, it's a very confusing, very confronting kind of day because it's so much gets decided that is lifelong. Like it's lifelong. And I was lucky because I had really good legal representation. I um, didn't back down on the things that were important, which was the children. The children, the most important thing. So we landed on a kind of just shy of 50-50 custody, and she got most of the assets, to be honest. Like, completely wiped me out. Got most of the assets, but to be honest, I didn't care because there was a custody that I was most worried about, and the family report writer had kind of made it clear the kids should be with mum, so I wanted to fight against that as much as possible. So again, got close to 50-50, and that was all that mattered. So it was a really long, hard battle, and that one day um, was very hard fought. And with everything that kind of, again, this is still on the taking the knee and starting to stand again kind of moment. Um, that day where the court orders finally get signed, like it was a full day, like it was a whole day. Like we got there before the offices opened, so chambers. and left after they'd shut. Like, it was a full day of going through this process. And I don't know what I thought. I think I thought that I would feel relieved once custody was sorted, and I'd fought so hard. I thought I might feel even elated, like, I had people going, "Oh, we'll have the champagne ready," but I kind of told them at the time, I don't think I want to. Will be celebrating, and I didn't. So after that kind of moment, I think I collapsed. I probably spent 2 months just barely getting out of bed. Like, I'd get out of bed to take care of the kids, and that was about it. Um, and that was insane. Like, it was two months of just sleeping constantly. And um, again, I thought I'd be relieved, and I thought I'd be kind of like, yay, but I wasn't at all. And the reality is, it was a hypertension of a system which had been under constant assault for 15 years. And I was exhausted, been trying to fight my way through the relationship and survive it as best I could. Then you had to find the raw willpower to get out of the abusive relationship, and I don't think people really understand how hard that is. Like, it's the most colossal thing you'll ever do in your life is getting out of an abusive relationship and finding the way to navigate safely to exit. And I don't think I have ever been through anything as difficult and as challenging as to find your way out from an exit point of view. And then fighting to get to a point where you were at least kind of had the divorce signed off and were officially separated and kind of divvied up the assets, and the court process was finally done, which now it was. And that was like 15 years, and I was cooked. I was cooked. I was just like, I'm, I'm fucking done, man. I just slept, and uh, couldn't function for a couple of months easily after that. And when and I'll get into this probably in the next episode, because I might start to wrap this one up. But it was a soul, a body, and a mind that had been through one of the hardest battles any soul, body, or mind has ever had to go through. And again, those who have been through long-term abusive relationships know exactly what I'm talking about. Um, and all I needed to do was just have some time to recover, which I did for a couple of months. I'm going to end there because that was a long way of saying this. This is the moment it kind of felt like just taking a knee. From here in the next episode, I'm going to talk about what it means to start to stand again. So the kneeling is all about stabilizing and just kind of getting through the current storm, which, going back to my analogy of being in that storm with the in the dark, in the mud, that was a process I had been through. And now is, again, taking that analogy probably a little bit too far. Now I was starting to see the skies clear, and not sunshine, but at least no rain, or at least less rain, and still on your knees. So that process of going from on your knees to starting to stand again, so that kind of, post 2 months of just sleeping, what do you do there? So how do you actually start to get to this point where you start to recover from what had happened, recover from what you had, the things in you have to heal, that was done to you, plus were pre-existing before, to start to reclaim your life. And for me, um, I think one of the most clarifying periods in that was realizing that a lot of what I had to do as a male victim of family violence through that process, I had to do by myself, and I had to create it by myself. And I had this kind of, and I'll get to this in the next episode. But I had this kind of moment where I was there going that there is nothing out there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there for guys. There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. There's like some bits on advocacy and there's some bits on please stand up for men's rights, but there's nothing out there about how to get them to get through this process and how to recover from family violence because it's all, either written for somebody else or it lends into content which is very either hate filled or is very advocacy orientated, which is um, best chest beating around the topic, which is all great. Like it has it. Don't get me wrong, that has its space and it needs to happen. 100% needs to happen. But the actual like scaffold, the actual steps, the actual process of getting you through, that I couldn't find. That I can't find, not for men anyway. And I had to, cobble my stuff together, as I said before, from the books I had been reading and from Scott, my psychologist, and stuff I had built myself. So in the next episode, I'll talk about um, the moment where I started to build Stand Again as a originally it was just going to be some education that kind of went out on a website. I was like, I'll throw it out on a website and just leave it at that and get on with my life. And then the more I started pouring into it, again, I'll talk about this in an episode, but the more I started pouring into it, the more I started realizing I was extremely passionate about it. But then also, how do you start to bring lightness back into your world after you have been through such a dark storm? And that's starts getting us into what have been talking about as stage 3 recovery. So, how do you start going into recovery mode after everything you've been through so that you can start to laugh again and you can start to be more in the moment with your children and with the people around you? So that'll be the next episode. All right. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there. Hopefully, this has helped in some ways. Again, these are highly unscripted. So if any of this has been any value to for you at all, I really do need help to grow this channel. So even if you just throw something, even anything, into the chat or just interact with it in some particular way, it really does help the algorithm gods know that this topic is important. If you can share it, if you can like it, if you can become a member, whatever you can do, it really does, in my opinion anyway. I think a lot of this really needs to get out there so that other men realize that they are not alone, but also so that YouTube algorithms recognize that this is an important topic that needs to get in front of more people. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one-on-one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.